welcome to Bloom with Wunmi, where I'll be speaking with and interviewing exceptional women, ladies that are leaders in their right, either in the corporate world, business world, or community leaders. And today I'm so excited to have with me Shannon Pestun, who is the co-founder of the Finance Cafe and the founder of Pestun Consulting. Nice to have you here, Shannon.
Well, it's so nice to see you. And I know that we're miles apart and I used to have you so much closer to me, but it's great to have a conversation with you today. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, nice to have you here. So, okay, just tell us a short story about yourself. Who is Shannon?
Well, Shannon, if you were to read my bio, as you kind of just alluded to, I'm the founder of the Finance Cafe, which is a financial literacy platform that's been designed specifically to help advance women entrepreneurs and looking at financial literacy from a very from a woman's perspective of business and of money. So that's the Finance Cafe. I also work a lot with government, with industry, and other organizations that are working to advance women's entrepreneurship here in Canada. But you know, my background, like everyone's got a little story behind them. And my true bio is, Shannon Pestun dropped out of high school when she was 17 years old. She kind of was aimless for a few years. And it really took the School of Hard Knocks and going back to real school and then to post-secondary school to end up to where I am today. And it's leading my own companies and really stepping into my own self as a woman entrepreneur.
Wow, that is interesting. That is interesting. So actually, what made you I know you said School of Hard Knocks, but what was that main thing that made you to say, okay, Shannon, wake up, you can't continue like this. You need to change the trajectory of your life. What was that?
Well, I was really fortunate because at 17 years old, I was working two minimum wage jobs. And, 30 years ago, minimum wage was a lot lower than it is today. And, I was just barely keeping it together. But I had a female boss, a woman leader who was just so strong. She was kind and empathetic, and she helped me get back into high school. And she just sort of sat me down one day. I remember we were sitting in the middle of a mall in Edmonton, Alberta. And she said, Shannon, there's so much more ahead of you, but this isn't the life that you're meant to live. And you've got to make some different choices. And, I was very fortunate. I also had my parents who were very supportive, but I went through a bit of a rebellious phase and just dealing with life trauma as well at a young age that I wasn't really equipped to deal with it. And fortunately, I always had some very strong, loving and kind people that saw in me a potential that I had not yet seen in myself.
Wow. I'm just listening. I'm just wondering where that woman is, that strong female leader you had and saw something in you. So what can you say or say to us as leaders and all the leaders out there about really mentoring or looking out for the younger people around us?
Oh, that's such a great question. And, I guess if I put my 17-year-old hat on again, it's looking like for the best in people. And, I think this is a lot of great leaders do this really well. They know how to bring out your full potential. They know sometimes more than you know about what's best for you. And sometimes that's putting on a little bit of pressure to pull you out of a situation and helping to elevate yourself. And I guess for me, it's always trying to find the good in people. And every one of us has a story that'll break your heart. Every one of us has our own lived experience, our own barriers, our own mountains that we've climbed. But recognizing that, first of all, we are all in this world together. But when we are in positions of leadership, it's to say, how do we start elevating the people around us?
Wow. So how has that experience helped you and shaped your own leadership experience and your own leadership philosophy?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because if you asked me maybe 20 years ago how I would have defined my leadership roles, or 15 when I was first a leader, and I failed miserably in leadership. I was hard on my team. I guess leadership for me is it's so fluid and it changes as as we change and as we evolve and as the world around us changes. And I remember being a horrible leader. I led by fear. I didn't have my own sense of self-confidence at that time. I felt that I had to do everything. I felt I just didn't know how to empower people to let them do the work that they needed to do, because I guess maybe just from my own lived experience, I know what it was always like to be on that edge of, going one way, going the good path, or going down a bad path. And I was so fear driven that I led with that same inner, that belief of I'm going to fail. I was always so scared of failure. And so, Shannon 15 years ago to Shannon today is a very, very different leader. But defining leadership for me, I think it just depends on, how we are led, and the teachers that we have and the experiences that we have in whether it's the corporate community or our religious communities or our wider social networks. Like, leaders can emerge from everywhere. Wow.
I'm just looking like, okay, this is so interesting. I could ask you lots of questions, but I'm really going to say, you spoke about things changing like 15 years ago and you now. So do you want to talk about what was that thing you did, or what changed? What were the things you had to do? To take you to where you are today as a leader?
I think a lot of things change. One, I think the society around us has changed a lot. And when I think back to business, say 20 years ago, it was very much bottom line focused. It was profit, profit, profit. And, I remember when I was just coming out of university, we had an economist come speak to us, and his name was Shell Nordstrom. And I probably missed the whole point of what this fellow was talking about, but he was on stage talking about capitalism. And he was talking about how, as a culture, we became very individualistic. We became very impulsive. We wanted everything now. Everything was about immediacy, and everything was about being as efficient and even as wasteful as possible, just so that we could keep this economic engine turning. And I remember him saying, in that process, we learned, or we forgot how to compromise. We forgot how to look out for one another. We became a very selfish generation. And I think corporations were growing so fast. We saw a lot of the big box retailers really explode during this time, and everything was about the bottom line. Everything was about continual growth. And I think technology as well came into the picture. And really, the speed of which change happened was so incredibly quick. But I think now what's changing, when I think about the environment that we're in, is people are looking for purpose. Yeah. And people want to know that there's more to life, that they can work on something and give to something that is meaningful to them, that we can address some of these big global issues that, quite frankly, the next generation is going to have to be really coming together to solve. And we also have this sense of a global perspective. We didn't have that. 20 years ago, we didn't think beyond our own borders. The internet completely changed the way that we saw the world and our roles in it. And that includes the business world.
Wow. And I really like the changes that have happened and how that has made you change. The truth is that it's not everybody that's changing. Some people are not changing. Yeah. But as a leader, we keep evolving, we keep getting better. There's a thing about growth mindset, knowing that, okay, this is how I am, but I can change that. I can become better. I can become fluid, right? I can adapt to situation and become like really, really grow in that. Could you share your story of being in ATB? So you worked in ATB and you started something new that wasn't there before, like you're the pioneer person there. I would like you to share that story.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is I often will say that I was an accidental entrepreneur, or I am an accidental entrepreneur. I was also an accidental banker. But when I take a more spiritual look at this, I know that nothing ever happens by accident. For me, when I started working at ATB, I actually walked into the bank working as a marketing manager. So I was never on the finance side. I was terrible at numbers. I hated accounting. I'd almost flunked out of all those courses in school. So to find myself as a banker was actually quite surprising to me. But I remember we had an executive vice president at ATB who really encouraged me to become a banker. And he said, Shannon, we can teach the numbers. We can teach the financial management of a company. What we can't teach is people to care about other people, people to be really deeply curious. And he said, what I see in you would really make you a great banker. And I became a business banker. And I'll tell you, Wunmi, I spent a couple of years like asking myself, why did I make that decision? Because I felt so out of my element. Now you think about, again, how hard it was for me to take myself out of a fear-based mentality. Here I was sitting every day feeling insecure in my knowledge, feeling that I had such a big responsibility to take care of people's businesses. And I thought they have no idea how little I actually know. I was terrified. I sat in that space for about 2 years. But I think the difference between Shannon, version 1.0 to 2.0 was that I sat in that discomfort and I said, I'm here for a reason. I'm going to learn everything that I can. But what I learned in this process is one day I remember looking around and I had a customer and I will never forget her. And partly because her name is so memorable, but her name is Shiny. And Shiny and I were working together on a deal. She was looking to purchase a business. And I realized that she was the only woman entrepreneur that I had in my whole business portfolio.
Wow.
And it sparked something in me. And I thought, wow, isn't that weird? And it wasn't even so much that this was the first woman. I was like, why does this experience working with this woman entrepreneur feel so much different to me than the experience of working with male entrepreneurs? And I still love the male entrepreneurs, don't get me wrong, but there was something about that experience. And there was something about the barriers that her and I had to overcome together to get her business financed. And so Shiny has played a huge role in my life because she put the spotlight there and she sparked the question, where are all the women? And maybe this is the marketing side of me that starts to kind of come out now, but now all I want to do is research the problem. I become so deeply obsessed with peeling back the different layers. And the more questions I would ask, the deeper the problem became. And it was, well, women, there's a gender gap in entrepreneurship because women don't have the same access to financial capital that they need to start their businesses. They don't have the same social capital or the professional networks around them to help them succeed. And that they need that because their businesses are younger. They also don't have the same entrepreneurial skills because, again, many of us didn't come out of traditional business schools. We didn't anticipate becoming entrepreneurs. We had an idea, we brought that to market, but a lot of that entrepreneurial capital isn't there. And I remember sitting there thinking as a banker, wow, the bank could change every single part of this story because we have the financial capital. We have the networks and the professional environment around us that we can really coach and mentor and connect women to other professionals. And we have the training to be able to teach them how to do this exceptionally well. And I thought if we could get a new banking experience that addresses all of those barriers, wow, what would the potential look like for women entrepreneurs?
Wow.
And so that is the story of it. And I remember, when the idea first hit me, I didn't know how to monetize it yet. I didn't know how to tell the bank, and ultimately banks are still about making money. And I had to really try and put a number to it. And I kept saying, like, I don't know. I really don't know the metrics yet. And there was no data to give me those metrics. And I just said, but I believe in my heart that this is the right thing to do. And I advocated probably for 5 years on heart alone to get the strategy accepted in the organization, and ultimately it was operationalized.
Wow. So what kept you going for 5 years?
I don't know if it was like a bit of like, I'll say stubbornness was a little bit of this because I thought this problem is so real. Like how can we not be doing something about it? So I was very persistent in advocating for this group. But as I became an advocate, I also kept, being more research focused, and I would stay in the numbers because I was always trying to prove the business case. And I knew it was the right thing to do. And at the same time, a lot of the other financial institutions we're also starting to put women's programs in place and looking at women's entrepreneurship. And I think the game changer for me was when I was appointed to the federal minister, and I have to give her so much credit for this, but the Honorable Minister Mary Ng, who stood up the first women entrepreneurship strategy in Canada. And I was on her panel, a panel of advisors to help put this strategy in motion. And the game changer for me in that was, okay, there is something real here, and the financial industry has to make critical changes. Otherwise, it's going to leave 51% of the population behind.
What I can hear in your story is resilience. I can hear adaptability, being able to adapt to things. I can hear ownership, you taking ownership of, this is what I see, this is what I know. I'm taking ownership of it and I'm going to run with it. I'm going to be resilient, continue doing this until I see that change. I know all those things you've said, some of the ingredients or the what's the right word now? The qualities that leaders need to have for us to really lead effectively. That we need to be resilient, we need to be adaptable, we need to have that ownership for our own development, ownership for what we believe, ownership for our own voice, and being able to stand with it. That's very interesting. Wow.
Well, you know what's also interesting about it, and I guess this is another thing that I've learned about leadership too, because I would guess I would call myself a transformative leader. You know, I'm always working to take something to the next level. And there's a bit of a danger with that, because it's for somebody like me, I'm a perfectionist. So I can exhaust everybody around me because I get so fixated on how do we make this better? And I want everybody coming along for that. So I try and really inspire and motivate and get people behind me. But the other thing too is that through that kind of, when you have that type of resilience, when you have that type of ownership, you also risk disrupting yourself right out of the very job that you have. Because if organizations aren't ready for that kind of disruption, and there are times, and I have had to learn this the hard way several times in my life, that maybe no means not right now, but to keep pressing forward. And so there's a fine balance of being a change agent, of being a positive disruptor, but also not disrupting yourself right out of the job. Now, fortunately, that didn't happen for me, but that easily could have been the path that I could have gone down.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. So knowing when to let's just stop, when to calm down. Yeah, so you're you're disruptor, you're a change agent, which is wonderful. And I think that's when it comes to you really understanding who you are, your self-awareness, and seeing what is your strength. And sometimes our strength is good to show for, but sometimes we actually also learn to cool down on that strength sometimes. But if your strength is too much, again, I think this is just an interesting conversation that we can continue to have. And I just love the fact that as you talk, as you speak, you keep bringing up new things and new topics for us to discuss about, right? I really love that.
But you mentioned the word strengths and weaknesses, and this is the paradox, because our strengths and weaknesses are just different sides of the same coin. And that's where it gets so darn tricky, right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes the very things that make us successful, or the things that where we're weak, they actually play to our strength. They play off of each other, and it's understanding that balance. But that self-awareness is something that, yeah, I think we all have to work on. But it's especially when you are somebody who is very driven by change the way that I am, it's something that you really have to be mindful of, because you don't know when to stop sometimes. So you're constantly chasing perfection. And also, like I mentioned earlier, it can be really tiring and emotionally exhausting for people to keep up to that level of change.
Yeah, I think one thing I've learned is that we should chase progress, not perfection, right? Just just continue. That progress is wonderful, is what we should chase, because perfection is just sometimes it just stresses you out, and then
it's unhealthy.
And it's not healthy. You can actually burn out yourself. And that's not where what you want to be. Wow. Okay. Maybe some of our speakers, viewers might not know that you are a Métis lady, woman. So for those that are not in Canada, I will allow you to talk about that. So how has it been being a woman and an indigenous woman in the corporate world? How was that for you? And how is it enabled you to be the kind of leader that you are today?
Well, thanks for that question. And yes, I am a proud member of the Métis Nation Region 3 here in Southern Alberta. And yeah, I mean, my Métis roots run deep. My grandmother was a Métis elder, and from a very young age, I do remember her going into schools and speaking about her lived experience. But again, it's a lot of Métis people, myself, even a lot of people would think that I'm white. So Métis people, sometimes you didn't fit in the settlers' perspective, but you didn't also fit into the First Nations perspective, because we were the mix. And so there was always identity issues with where do we fit. And I certainly did feel that. And I also grew up, I did grow up in I don't want to say that, I think the difference when you're visibly a minority, it's people, you see it right away, but so the discrimination can be felt right away. Other people, it's more subtle sometimes when you aren't so visible in your intersectionality. And for me, I would say that I didn't even know how to embrace being Métis, because it wasn't something that we were always really made to feel proud of. And so it took me a long time to understand that in and of itself was a barrier for a lot of women. And again, in the work that I do, it's one thing to start advocating for women, but then you add on other intersectionalities. So you take a look at, geography, you take a look at class, you take a look at race, you take a look at age, you take a look at ability. There's so many different ways when we start really looking at people where bias and discrimination come into play. I was really fortunate when I worked at ATB that Indigenous culture became a really important part of our organization. And a lady that I worked with, her name was Holly Cooper, and Holly really became a mentor to me in many ways about embracing our Indigenous lived experience, helping me work through some things that I had questions about, and giving me this identity back. And as I was starting to do work for the women entrepreneurship space, then suddenly, again, you take the next question and you think, okay, well, if this is the gender gap with women generally, what does it look like for Black women entrepreneurs? What does it look like for Indigenous women entrepreneurs? So as an Indigenous woman, I don't define myself or my success as like, I don't say like, oh, I would never say, oh, I'm Shannon Pestun, I'm an Indigenous woman entrepreneur. I don't typically announce myself like that, you wouldn't say, oh, I'm a Black woman entrepreneur. Like, you don't have to address it in that way, but very much a part of the heart that I bring to my work, and, being able to be an advocate for many women whose voices are not heard, and being able to also advance truth and reconciliation and putting my own lens on that. So it's hard to say because my leadership as an Indigenous woman wasn't sparked because I was an Indigenous woman. Yeah. I think a lot of my work actually allowed me to find myself as an Indigenous woman, not the other way around. It's kind of hard for me to explain what I mean in that, but it's now I understand why sustainability is so important to me. I start to understand why certain things don't feel right. There's this tension between, capitalism and community, or, how Indigenous ways of knowing and ways of being actually are. They don't always fit what is defined as capitalism today. So there's lots that I'm still learning. I'm sure even my language in this isn't perfect, and I certainly don't strive for that. But I just think that being an Indigenous woman, I recognize now that I do have a unique perspective, a different lens that is an important lens, just as yours is important, just as anyone's is.
Yeah, I think I really like the fact that just embracing all of you and your identity, and actually believe that all of us, our identity actually affects what we do. And the earlier we embrace the identity and show up as we are, bring all ourselves out, and even as leaders, we give the people that we're leading the the permission, so to speak, to be themselves, right? And the thing about leadership is that I'm sure you know that we don't always have all the answers, but it's just that continuous growth and also allowing yourself to know that I don't know everything, but I'm on a journey and I keep getting better. I keep knowing myself better, and I keep like peeling each layer every time and say, wow, okay, this was there, I never knew, just growing. And that's so interesting. Thank you for sharing that. I really like your personal brand, and I just want to know, how was knowing your identity and owning who you are helped you develop your personal brand? And yeah, can you just tell us how you came up with the personal brand and just everything, how that worked together?
Well, it's so funny because we always think we don't have a personal brand, and yet all of us do. And sometimes we just don't realize that we do. But I guess, and even mine came a little bit by accident as well, because when I was working to uncover this challenge that I saw as an opportunity around women's entrepreneurship, and when I didn't have immediate buy-in, I went underground. I actually created an alias on Twitter and on LinkedIn, so that I could be part of these conversations around women's entrepreneurship without actually anybody knowing at ATB who was driving some of these conversations. So I called myself a girls biz banker. And at that time, I gave myself that name because I wanted people to know that I was about women's entrepreneurship, that I was about being a banker. I wanted to create change. And I don't know, that even gave me power in my voice to have conversations that maybe I didn't feel psychologically safe to have in the open, because I was challenging the very system that wrote my paycheck. So it was kind of a weird place to live in. And my personal brand just, I think, came because people believed that what I was trying to do was coming from a place of heart. It wasn't to disrupt for any other reason than to make life better for other people, but understanding where some of our systems, and the banking system is one of the most powerful systems in the world. I mean, it controls the wealth, right? In so many ways. And so, when there are barriers for people to be able to access financial capital, we hold them back from reaching their full economic potential and what they're capable of doing in their lives. And I think people really felt from me, at least I hope they felt from me, that this was now a value set for me. This wasn't just a career. This wasn't something I was going to walk away from. I was actually willing to risk my career for it, because I felt that I felt like the conversation was that important. And I don't know, I held an opinion on it, and I stayed very not firm, but I stayed true to the words, stay true to the vision of what I wanted to be able to do. I stayed true to the problem. I created communities around me. I mean, the most incredible people that I have met through this journey, because there's other people that are doing it. It wasn't just me, but I was able to find like-minded people. And for all those days that I would hear no over here, there was this whole other group on another side that was saying, no, you're doing the right thing, keep going. And so I was able to find these different mentors, and then you start associating yourself with, people in these groups, people start to notice you differently. And it's today, I often ask myself, today, if I was to start this work, Shannon Pestun would be who? Because it's everywhere today. But in the 10 years ago, when we started talking about this, it wasn't mainstream conversation.
Well, thank you very much. I'm just so enjoying this conversation. I like the way it's going. So interesting. So I know you've worked with different women. And what would you say you've seen as common mistakes that women make that deter them from rising into leadership or to lead?
Yeah, I mean, another great question. You hate to say that these things are gendered, but we know that, we can look at the research, and we see every day that women, they're not sitting in the C-suite positions yet. They're not sitting at the boardroom table. We wouldn't have all of these initiatives around us if that were the case. And so when I think about some of the common mistakes, and I've been guilty of some of these myself. But I think one of the biggest mistakes is that as women, we wait for other people sometimes to validate our worth. So we're not we're relying on our managers to elevate our careers. We're not always taking ownership of it, or sometimes we're taking too long. So if you see something, a project that you really want to take on in a company or in an organization, say, I want to try this. Like, this is why I'm excited about it. And I don't think we put our hands up enough for those types of initiatives or those types of opportunities. I think we'll wait for a tap on the shoulder. I know I certainly did for many years. And it was only when I became passionate about this that I was able to drive my work. And I'll maybe just get to that in a second. But I also think a big thing is confidence. Because we don't have all the role models that we need, and because we're still working on a lot of this, we don't always have the same confidence that I think that a man has. We feel like we have to have, all the perfect skills. We have to match the qualifications perfectly. And as I understand women, working with them in entrepreneurship, it's because our reputations are so important to us, and our word is so important to us. And we don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. It's not how we are. And we're not competitive. And a lot of the promotions and a lot of the ways that, again, corporate environments work it is competitive. It is based on, who's got the top sales, we don't always value the humanness that we need in business. And I think that's what women really bring to the table. But I also think that women, we don't know how to say no. So we'll take on other projects that aren't always the high profile projects, because those projects need to get done. And we feel valued when someone says, hey, can you do this? But it's also, being able to say no, but also knowing what to say yes to, I think is probably another, it's another thing. So if you have an opportunity in a company to volunteer for something, put your hand up for those things, but follow where your heart wants you to go. It's not about saying yes to things that don't align to you. And the last thing I would say, and I see this in entrepreneurship as well as women within the business environment, is not investing in ourselves. Investing in our learning, treating ourselves as if we're an investment. Like financial literacy is part of the reason we started the Finance Cafe, to bring financial literacy to women entrepreneurs, is because we know that women are self-reporting to be less confident in their financial capabilities. So if this is how women are feeling, then we need to be able to create mechanisms to change that narrative. But when we don't invest in ourselves, we don't grow. And so it doesn't have to be big investments, but I think financial literacy for women inside of corporations as well, really important, because you can't get to those executive level positions if you don't understand how the money works in the organization. So financial literacy, I think, is a huge skill that you need as an entrepreneur or just working in an organization if your goal is to advance in that organization.
Well, thank you very much. I just really enjoyed this conversation. Yeah, we really spoke about the mentors that have helped you along the way, the leaders that you've worked with. So what advice would you give a young lady that wants to grow her leadership skills?
I think the most important thing for me, and it was what I guess gave me the belief that I could be a leader, was leaders come from everywhere. They rise from, one small movement to a big move. It doesn't have to be big steps. Leadership is just, I think when you take something that you're really passionate about, for example, and you create something about, other people want to follow that. They want to be part of that energy. You don't always have to wait for a leadership position to be there. Like, we create leadership positions. And I think even at ATB, when I was lobbying for this role, I remember talking to my immediate boss about it, and I could tell right away he wasn't excited about my strategy at all. So I went and I studied all the vice presidents in our organization, and I thought, who is the most creative, strategic-minded vice president that I can think of? Because I needed somebody that was going to be a little bit edgy, a little bit out of the box. And I went to that leader, and that leader then made me a leader. And so we do have control over where we take our career. So don't be scared. If you see something and you just put yourself out there. And I think taking small risks every day helps prepare you to take those big risks, but you have to massage that risk muscle and make it feel like it's second nature to you, because we don't take enough risks.
Be a risk taker. Wow. Thank you. I think this is going to be my final question now. We just want to know what we talk about leadership a lot, but what does self-leadership have to do with you being the ability to lead others? What's the relationship between the two?
Between thought leadership?
Self-leadership.
Self-leadership.
Yes.
Okay, so can you repeat the question for me again? Sorry.
So, we're talking about leading others and co, but then we need to lead ourselves first.
Yes.
Right. We need to make some decisions and co. So how does self-leadership affect the way we lead and us rising to be leaders?
Well, self-leadership is also about knowing what we want and what matters to us. So self-leadership, if you don't know what your values are, it's really hard to find your path. I always encourage people to say, like, what feels good in your heart, because if you follow your heart, it will never lead you astray. And I always think our values, they stay pretty consistent with us most of our lives. And so, those core values, when we start to think about, okay, if this is what matters to me, I'm going to live a life according to these values. And leadership, you can't speak one way and then act a different way. So that self-leadership is also about helping you present as a leader to the rest of the world. And so self-leadership for me is about really knowing yourself, challenging yourself, being honest about the things that are broken in you, things that need to be healed within you, things that you might not like about yourself. None of us are perfect, but it's embracing those imperfections, I think, too. And because we're never going to be perfect leaders either. There's always things that we're going to learn. And so I think self-leadership for me is really about knowing those values so that when you show up as your authentic self, then others know who they're following.
Oh, thank you very much, Shannon. So it's been an interesting and insightful conversation today with Shannon Pestun. Thank you very much to viewers. Thank you for being with us today. And stay tuned to the next episode of Bloom With Wunmi, where we'll be talking about women in leadership. We want to raise and empower leaders, especially female leaders. Thank you, and God bless. Any passing words?
And I just wanted to say thank you. And I just admire so much the work that you're doing. I mean, you are a true leader. I have followed you for years, and I'm so proud of the work that you do and that you continue to do. So God bless, right back to you. And thank you for letting me share my story and be a little bit vulnerable with you today too, Wunmi.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being vulnerable, because I really learned so much from you today. Wow, we need to talk more. We need to connect more. We need to collaborate more.
That's right. I would love that.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Okay, take care and God bless.